She was the last one to board, a quiet shadow among the 18 other cadets filing into the belly of the aging cargo plane. The others, all fresh-faced young men and women from the Academy's officer training program, moved with the awkward shuffle of people trying to look comfortable in uncomfortable flight harnesses. They stole glances at her, the stranger who had been inserted into their rotation at the last minute. She was shorter than most of them, with a lean, accorded physique that her standard-issue jumpsuit couldn't hide. Her dark hair was pulled back tight against her scalp, and her face bore the weathered look of someone who had spent far more time in the elements than in a classroom. She carried herself with a peculiar stillness, a patience that seemed alien to the jittery energy of the cadets. The jump master for the flight, a pompous cadet captain who had been a bully since grade school, barked orders with manufactured authority. His name was Kyle, and he had the broad shoulders and weak chin of a man who relied on genetics rather than grit. He strutted down the center aisle, slapping helmets and yanking on straps to check their tightness, his comments loud enough for everyone to hear. "All right, listen up," he yelled over the roar of the propellers. "This is a high-altitude, low-opening exercise. Standard procedure. You all know the drills." His eyes landed on the woman. "Except for you. You're the new transfer from the logistics base, right? Never jumped out of a moving plane before, have you, sweetheart?" The woman met his gaze. Her eyes were a calm, unflinching gray. "I've jumped before," she said. Her voice was low and even, carrying a weight that silenced the nervous chatter around her. Kyle smirked, emboldened by his audience. "Oh, yeah? Out of a Cessna at a county fair? Let me guess. You were in the Army?" He turned to the other cadets, looking for laughs. Probably a desk jockey who filed paperwork for a real soldier. A few cadets chuckled nervously. The woman said nothing. She simply turned her attention back to her own gear, her hands moving with a fluid efficiency that was hypnotic to watch. She checked her primary chute, her reserve, and the automatic activation device with a ritualistic precision that spoke of thousands of hours of practice. One of the male cadets, a skinny kid named Peters who was terrified of heights, watched her, and her calmness was the only thing keeping his own panic at bay. Kyle, feeling emboldened by his perceived victory, decided to push further. As the plane climbed through 10,000 feet, the air grew thin and cold. He walked back to where she sat and stood over her, legs braced wide. "You know the rules, new girl. In this unit, the new meat does a little something to prove they're worthy. A tradition." He leaned down. "How about you give us a motivational speech? Or maybe just admit that you're in over your head, so we can all feel better about having a girl slow us down." The woman finished her final check and looked up at him. The silence in the plane was absolute, broken only by the drone of the engines. "I don't have anything to prove to you," she said softly. Kyle's face reddened. The rejection in front of his peers was a direct challenge. "That's where you're wrong. See, up here I'm the law, and I say you're a liability. A waste of oxygen." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a nasty whisper that still carried. "Tell you what, why don't you just stay seated when the light goes green? Let the real jumpers handle this. We don't need to be scraping a pancake girl off the desert floor." The woman stared at him for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then a tiny, almost imperceptible smile played at the corner of her lips. It wasn't a smile of amusement. It was the smile of a wolf listening to a sheep bark. "I'll be jumping," she said. The plane droned on towards the drop zone, a flat expanse of dirt and scrub 20,000 feet below. The tension inside the cabin was a physical presence. Peters, the scared cadet, watched the woman as she closed her eyes, not in fear, but in meditation. He wondered what could make a person that calm. They were 30 minutes from the drop when Kyle decided to escalate his tradition. He gathered a few of his close friends. at the inner circle of bullies who had ruled the academy social scene for years. They huddled near the rear ramp, their voices low but their malicious intent clear on their faces. "Look at her," Kyle muttered. "Just sitting there like she owns the place, thinks she's better than us. I say we teach her a lesson. Show her what happens to people who don't show respect." One of his friends, a thick-necked brute named Miller, grinned. "What did you have in mind? Hog-tie her shoot?" Kyle shook his head, his eyes gleaming with a wicked light. "Better. We help her out the door early, give her a little surprise, the ultimate icebreaker." He mimed a shoving motion. "The shock will either make her scream like a little girl, or she'll freeze up and we can say she chickened out. Either way, we win." They laughed, a harsh sound swallowed by the engines. They were so confident in their superiority, so blinded by their own arrogance, and that they never considered the possibility that they might be the ones who were outmatched. As the red light by the ramp flickered on, signaling 10 minutes to the drop, Kyle stood up and stretched. He walked towards the woman, his two cronies flanking him. The other cadets sensed the shift in the air, a darkening of the mood. Peters felt his stomach clench. "All right, sweetheart," Kyle announced, his voice carrying. "Time's up. We've decided you're holding up the rotation. You're going first." The woman opened her eyes and stood. She was shorter than Kyle by a head, but the way she uncoiled from the bench made him take an involuntary half-step back. She looked past him, towards the ramp. "The light isn't green," she stated simply. "It will be in about 60 seconds, Kyle said, recovering his bravado. "But you're not waiting for the green. You're jumping on red, a special test. Either you do it, or we throw you out. What's it going to be?" The cabin was dead silent. The woman looked at Kyle, then at Miller, then back. She saw the cruelty in their eyes, the absolute certainty that they held all the power. She took a deep breath and let it out slowly. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," she said, her voice so low only the three of them could hear it. Kyle misinterpreted the warning for fear. He laughed. "I'm dealing with a logistics clerk who's about to learn a very hard lesson." He nodded to Miller, who reached for the lever that controlled the massive rear ramp. With a hydraulic hiss that drowned out everything else, the ramp began to lower. The inside of the plane was instantly filled with a deafening roar and a hurricane-force wind. The desert, a terrifying mosaic of brown and green, was visible 200 miles away and 5 miles down. The cold was brutal. For stealing the breath from their lungs, cadets grabbed for handholds, their faces masks of terror. Kyle and his friends grabbed the woman. For a second, she resisted, her feet planted with a strength that surprised them. For a moment, it was a stalemate. But 3 against 1, and with the force of the wind behind them, they managed to shove her hard. She stumbled backwards, her arms flailing, and disappeared over the edge of the ramp into the abyss. Peters screamed. Several cadets gasped. "Kyle!" See, Miller and their friend stood at the edge, looking down, a triumphant grin spreading across Kyle's face. "There," he panted. "Problem solved. Now let's hope the rest of you can—" He never finished the sentence. At that exact moment, the jump master for the actual mission, a sergeant who had been in the cockpit, emerged from the front of the plane. He was holding a clipboard and a radio, and his face was a mask of professional calm that shattered instantly when he saw the open ramp and the cadets huddled near it. "What the hell is going on?" he screamed over the wind. "Where is the jumper? The specialist from logistics? We're not at the drop zone yet. The green light isn't on." Kyle's bravado evaporated. His face went pale. She fell," he stammered. "It was an accident. The wind just... She lost her footing." The sergeant, a grizzled veteran with 20 years of service, looked at Kyle's face, then at the guilty faces of his friends. He knew a lie when he heard one. His eyes widened in horror, not just at the potential loss of life, but at the monstrous crime that had just been committed on his watch. You're telling me you pushed a non-jumper out of a plane at 20,000 feet without a parachute? He roared. He grabbed the radio from his belt. Mayday! Mayday! This is Cargo Flight 741. We have a jumper down. Repeat, we have an unauthorized exit. Coordinates. Get me a search and rescue team airborne now. On the ground, the wind was a living thing, howling across the barren landscape. The desert floor was a hard-packed pan of clay and rock, a place that promised a certain brutal death to anyone falling from the sky. And yet, there was a figure descending, but not falling. It was a controlled, stable freefall, in a perfect boxman position that would have been the envy of any advanced skydiver. The figure, the woman from the plane, was not tumbling, she was flying. Her mind was a crystal-clear pool of calm. The panic, the fear, the rage at the boys who had shoved her, all of it was compartmentalized, locked away behind a steel door built by years of the most intense training on Earth. She had been in freefall hundreds of times before, but this time was different. This time, she had no rig on her back. And her heart rate, monitored by a lifetime of biofeedback training, barely elevated. She checked her altitude, 18,000 feet, 17. At 15,000, she made a decision. Reaching down to the small of her back, her fingers found a hidden seam in her jumpsuit. With a sharp tug, she ripped it open, revealing a compact, square pack secured to her body by a low-profile harness hidden beneath her clothes. It wasn't a standard military rig. It was a specialty piece of equipment. A stealth chute designed for classified insertions where a bulky backpack would be a giveaway. Her hand found the ripcord. She looked up at the plane, now a distant speck. She thought of the faces of the cadets, the arrogance of the boy who had pushed her. A part of her, the part that was still human, felt a flicker of disappointment, but the other part, the part forged in the crucible of Bud/S training, the part that had crawled through mud and ice and survived the relentless harassment of instructors, felt only a cold, hard certainty. They would learn. They would all learn. At 14,000 feet, she pulled the cord. The stealth chute deployed with a sharp crack that jerked her upright, the sudden deceleration a familiar and comforting shock to her joints. She grabbed the steering toggles and began to steer, her eyes scanning the desert floor below, looking for a suitable landing zone away from the rocky patches. She was safe. She was in control. And she was very, very angry. Back on the plane, chaos reigned. The sergeant had the pilot on the radio diverting the aircraft for an emergency landing. Kyle and his friends were surrounded by the other cadets, who were now looking at them with a mixture of fear and disgust. Peters was crying, convinced he had just witnessed a murder. The sergeant turned from the radio, but his face a thundercloud of rage. He walked up to Kyle, grabbed him by the front of his harness, and slammed him against the bulkhead. "You listen to me, you worthless piece of shit," he snarled. "If that woman dies, I will personally testify at your murder trial. I will make sure you spend the rest of your life in a federal penitentiary. Do you understand me?" Kyle could only nod, his body trembling. The world he had known, a world where his money and his family name could fix anything, was crumbling around him. He had just committed a crime, a felony, on a military aircraft, in front of dozens of witnesses. The reality of it was a physical blow. The plane banked sharply, turning back towards the airfield they had left an hour ago. The sergeant was already on the radio to the base commander, his words clipped and professional, but carrying the weight of